Doctor's reputation ruined after ignoring veteran. Judge Caprio's historic courtroom justice. The rain fell steadily on Providence, Rhode Island, that cold February morning, each drop seeming to echo the desperation that had driven Army Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson to the emergency room of Rhode Island Medical Center. At 42, Marcus carried the invisible wounds of 3 tours in Afghanistan, his weathered face telling stories of sacrifice that most civilians could never fully comprehend. The limp in his left leg, a permanent reminder of an IED explosion in Kandahar, had worsened significantly over the past month. But it was the crushing weight of PTSD and mounting medical bills that had brought him to this moment of crisis. Marcus had served his country with distinction for 15 years, earning a Purple Heart and Bronze Star for his courage under fire. But the transition to civilian life had proven more challenging than any battlefield he had faced. The nightmares came regularly, the phantom pain in his injured leg never fully subsided, and the mounting medical expenses from inadequate VA coverage had pushed him to the brink of financial ruin. Despite his service and sacrifice, Marcus found himself among the growing number of veterans struggling to access adequate health care in a system that seemed to have forgotten their contributions. The emergency room at Rhode Island Medical Center bustled with the controlled chaos typical of a major urban hospital. Nurses moved efficiently between patients, their scrubs rustling as they navigated the maze of gurneys and medical equipment. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh, sterile glow over the waiting area, where anxious families and individuals in various states of medical distress waited for their turn to be seen. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the underlying tension of human suffering created an atmosphere that was both clinically clean and emotionally heavy. Dr. Harrison Blackwell represented everything that modern medicine aspired to be, at least on paper. At 55, he was the head of emergency medicine at Rhode Island Medical Center, a position he had earned through years of exemplary service and an impressive track record of successful patient outcomes. His resume read like a medical school. Dream: Harvard Medical School graduate, published researcher, recipient of numerous professional awards, and a prominent figure in Rhode Island's medical community. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled, his expensive suits immaculate even under the stress of emergency medicine, and his reputation for clinical excellence was matched only by his growing prominence in local social circles. Dr. Blackwell's office overlooking the harbor served as a testament to his success. Medical degrees and awards lined the walls, while expensive artwork and leather-bound medical journals created an atmosphere of scholarly achievement. The view from his window encompassed the historic neighborhoods of Providence, a daily reminder of his elevated position in the city's professional hierarchy. He had worked hard to reach this level of success, and he protected his reputation with the same intensity he brought to complex medical cases. When Marcus Thompson arrived at the emergency room that morning, his condition was clearly deteriorating. The chronic pain from his war injuries had been exacerbated by a recent fall at his construction job, where he worked despite his physical limitations because his military disability payments were insufficient to cover his basic living expenses. His face was pale and drawn, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold weather, and his movements were careful and measured, indicating significant discomfort. The triage nurse, Sarah Martinez, was a veteran herself who immediately recognized the signs of someone pushing through pain with military stoicism. Her assessment revealed elevated blood pressure, signs of severe pain, and what appeared to be complications from Marcus's previous injuries. She quickly classified his case as urgent, noting in her chart that the patient was a combat veteran, with multiple service-connected injuries requiring immediate attention from the attending physician. However, when Dr. Blackwell received the chart, His reaction was telling. The notation about Marcus being uninsured due to gaps in VA coverage and his status as a frequent visitor to various emergency rooms in the area seeking pain management seemed to overshadow the clinical indicators of genuine medical distress. In Dr. Blackwell's mind, honed by years of dealing with what he perceived as drug-seeking behavior and frivolous emergency room visits, Marcus Thompson fit a profile that he had grown increasingly impatient with over his career. The initial examination was perfunctory at best. Dr. Blackwell spent less than 5 minutes with Marcus, his manner distant and clinical in a way that suggested he had already reached conclusions about the case before fully assessing the patient. When Marcus attempted to explain the increasing severity of his symptoms and his desperate need for proper pain management and follow-up care, Dr. Blackwell's responses were dismissive and bordered on condescending. The prescription that Dr. Blackwell provided was woefully inadequate for someone with Marcus's level of chronic pain and current acute symptoms. A bottle of basic over-the-counter pain relievers and a referral back to the VA system that Marcus had already explained was providing insufficient care. No follow-up appointment was scheduled. No additional tests were ordered despite Marcus's concerning symptoms, and no consideration was given to the fact that this was a combat veteran whose service-connected injuries deserved comprehensive care. As Marcus left the emergency room that morning, clutching the inadequate prescription and feeling more hopeless than when he had arrived, several nurses and medical staff members who had witnessed the encounter exchanged concerned glances. Sarah Martinez, in particular, was troubled by what she had observed. Her own military background made her acutely aware of the challenges veterans faced in accessing adequate health care, and Dr. Blackwell's treatment of Marcus struck her as not just medically inadequate, but morally reprehensible. The weeks that followed Marcus's emergency room visit marked a steady decline in his condition. The inadequate pain management left him unable to work consistently, which meant missing days at his construction job and falling further behind on his already overwhelming medical bills. The physical pain was compounded by a deepening depression, as Marcus began to feel that his sacrifice for his country had been forgotten by the very society he had sworn to protect. Marcus's living situation reflected the harsh reality faced by many veterans. His small apartment in a rundown section of Providence was sparsely furnished, heated inadequately, and showed signs of deferred maintenance that his limited income couldn't address. Purple Heart and Bronze Star certificates hung on the wall next to overdue medical bills and foreclosure notices, creating a stark contrast between past honor and present struggle. The breaking point came 3 weeks after his visit to Dr. Blackwell's emergency room. Marcus's condition had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer walk without severe pain, and his attempts to seek help through the VA system had been met with scheduling delays and bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed to discourage rather than assist. In desperation, he returned to Rhode Island Medical Center, hoping that a different doctor might provide the care he desperately needed. This second visit proved to be even more traumatic than the first. Dr. Blackwell, seeing Marcus's name on the patient list, immediately labeled him as a repeat drug seeker and instructed the nursing staff to expedite his discharge without a thorough examination. The humiliation of being treated as a criminal rather than a patient who had sacrificed for his country pushed Marcus to a breaking point that would have consequences far beyond the hospital walls. Sarah Martinez, who had been working both shifts and witnessed both of Marcus's encounters with Dr. Blackwell, found herself facing a moral crisis. Her duty as a healthcare professional and her obligation as a fellow veteran to protect and support those who had served weighed heavily on her conscience. After her shift ended that night, she sat in her car, in the hospital parking lot, staring at her phone and wrestling with a decision that could impact her career but might save a fellow veteran's life and dignity. The decision she made that night would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose not just Dr. Blackwell's callous treatment of a veteran in need, but also systemic issues within the healthcare system that too often failed those who had served their country with honor. Her phone call to the Rhode Island Department of Health's Patient Advocacy Office would be the first step in a journey that would eventually lead to the courtroom of Judge Frank Caprio, where justice and compassion would converge in ways that neither Dr. Blackwell nor Marcus Thompson could have anticipated. The Rhode Island Department of Health's Patient Advocacy Office occupied a modest space in a government building downtown Providence, but within its unremarkable walls, dedicated professionals worked tirelessly to protect patients from medical negligence and discrimination. When Sarah Martinez's complaint about Dr. Blackwell's treatment of Marcus Thompson arrived on the desk of senior investigator Linda Chen, it immediately stood out from the typical grievances that crossed her path daily. Linda Chen had spent 12 years investigating healthcare complaints, and her experience had taught her to recognize patterns that others might miss. A former registered nurse herself, she understood both the pressures of emergency medicine and the ethical obligations that all healthcare providers swore to uphold. As she read Sarah's detailed account of Marcus's treatment, including the medical records and witness statements that the concerned nurse had meticulously compiled, Linda felt the familiar surge of righteous anger that came with encountering clear cases of patient mistreatment. The investigation that Linda launched was thorough and methodical. She began by requesting Marcus Thompson's complete medical records from Rhode Island Medical Center, a process that required navigating the complex maze of HIPAA regulations and hospital administrative procedures. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture of a healthcare system that had failed a veteran who deserved better treatment than he had received. Marcus's medical history revealed a complex case that required careful attention and comprehensive care. His service-connected injuries included not only the obvious physical trauma from the IED explosion, but also traumatic brain injury symptoms that had been inadequately addressed by the VA system. The combination of chronic pain, PTSD, and TBI created a medical situation that demanded compassion and expertise, not the dismissive treatment he had received from Dr. Blackwell. The investigation expanded as Linda Chen discovered that Marcus's case was not isolated. A pattern emerged of Dr. Blackwell's increasingly callous treatment of uninsured and underinsured patients, particularly veterans whose complex medical needs challenged his preference for quick, simple cases that enhanced his efficiency statistics. Hospital staff members, granted anonymity protection, began to come forward with accounts of similar incidents where Dr. Blackwell had provided substandard care to patients he deemed unworthy of his time and expertise. Dr. Patricia Williams, an emergency medicine physician who had worked alongside Dr. Blackwell for 3 years, provided particularly damaging testimony about his pattern of behavior. She described incidents where Dr. Blackwell had made derogatory comments about veteran patients, referring to them as frequent flyers and drug seekers without conducting proper medical assessments. Her account painted a picture of a physician who had allowed his professional success to overshadow his medical ethics and basic human compassion. The hospital's administration found itself in an increasingly difficult position as the investigation progressed. Rhode Island Medical Center prided itself on being a community hospital that served all patients regardless of their ability to pay, and Dr. Blackwell's behavior directly contradicted the institution's stated values. Hospital CEO Margaret Sullivan faced the challenge of balancing support for a physician who had contributed significantly to the hospital's reputation against mounting evidence of serious ethical violations. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson's condition continued to deteriorate, both physically and emotionally. The inadequate treatment he had received had allowed his medical problems to compound, requiring more intensive intervention than would have been necessary if he had received appropriate care initially. The psychological impact of being dismissed and humiliated by Dr. Blackwell had exacerbated his PTSD symptoms, creating a crisis that threatened not only his health, but his will to continue fighting for the care he deserved. The turning point in the investigation came when Linda Chen discovered that Dr. Blackwell had been billing insurance companies and Medicare for comprehensive examinations of patients like Marcus, while providing only cursory care. This revelation transformed the case from a matter of medical ethics into potential insurance fraud, elevating the investigation to involve federal agencies and the State Attorney General's office. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who had gained recognition for her prosecution of the Tyler Richardson case in Judge Caprio's court, was assigned to review the evidence against Dr. Blackwell. Her examination of the case revealed multiple potential violations of both state and federal laws, including patient abandonment, insurance fraud, and violations of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which required hospitals to provide appropriate screening and stabilization for all patients regardless of their ability to pay. The medical community in Rhode Island watched the investigation with growing concern and interest. Dr. Blackwell's fall from grace served as a stark reminder that professional success and social standing provided no protection against the consequences of ethical failures. Medical societies and veteran advocacy groups began to take positions on the case, with many calling for comprehensive reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the investigation gained momentum, media attention began to focus on the broader issues of veteran healthcare and medical discrimination. Local news outlets picked up the story, highlighting not only Dr. Blackwell's specific actions, but also the systemic problems that allowed such treatment to occur. The Providence Journal published a series of investigative articles that revealed the extent of healthcare challenges faced by Rhode Island veterans, using Marcus's case as a starting point for examining larger policy failures. The pressure on Dr. Blackwell intensified as professional and personal consequences began to mount. Medical colleagues who had previously sought his consultation began to distance themselves from him, referring their complex cases to other emergency medicine specialists. Social invitations dried up as Providence's professional community grappled with the revelation that one of their most prominent members had betrayed the fundamental principles of medical practice. Dr. Blackwell's legal team, led by prominent defense attorney Robert Sterling, attempted to minimize the significance of the allegations by characterizing them as misunderstandings arising from the pressures of emergency medicine. They argued that Dr. Blackwell's treatment of Marcus Thompson, while perhaps not ideal, fell within the acceptable range of emergency care given the constraints of a busy emergency department. However, the mounting evidence of pattern behavior and potential fraud made their defense increasingly difficult to sustain. The Rhode Island Board of Medical Licensure announced that it would conduct its own investigation into Dr. Blackwell's conduct, with the potential for sanctions ranging from mandatory retraining to license suspension or revocation. The board's investigation would examine not only the specific allegations involving Marcus Thompson, but also Dr. Blackwell's overall practice patterns and adherence to professional standards. As the various investigations proceeded, Marcus Thompson found himself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. Veterans advocacy organizations reached out to offer support, pro bono legal representation became available, and medical professionals volunteered to provide the comprehensive care he had been denied. The irony was not lost on Marcus that he was finally receiving the attention and care he needed, but only after enduring months of suffering and humiliation. The legal proceedings culminated when formal charges were filed against Dr. Blackwell. In Rhode Island Superior Court, the charges included healthcare fraud, patient abandonment, and violations of veterans' rights under state law. The case would be heard by Judge Caprio, whose reputation for combining legal expertise with profound compassion made him the ideal jurist to address a case that involved both complex legal issues and fundamental questions of human dignity and medical ethics. The atmosphere outside the Providence Superior Courthouse on the morning of Dr. Blackwell's hearing was unlike anything the building had witnessed in recent memory. Veterans from across Rhode Island had gathered to show their support for Marcus Thompson, their presence creating a sea of military service caps, unit patches, and patriotic displays that served as a powerful reminder of the sacrifice and service that Dr. Blackwell had so callously dismissed. Among the gathered veterans stood men and women from every era of American military service. Gray-haired Vietnam veterans sat alongside younger Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, their shared experience of service creating bonds that transcended generational differences. Many carried small American flags or wore their dress uniforms, transforming the courthouse steps into an impromptu memorial to military service and a demand for the respect and care that veterans deserved. Marcus Thompson arrived at the courthouse supported by his newfound community of advocates, but his physical condition remained a stark reminder of the consequences of Dr. Blackwell's negligence. The months of inadequate care had taken their toll, and Marcus moved slowly and carefully, his pain evident despite his efforts to maintain military bearing in this moment of public attention. His presence served as living testimony to the real-world impact of medical indifference and the human cost of healthcare discrimination. Judge Caprio entered his courtroom that morning, carrying the weight of a case that he recognized as having implications far beyond the specific allegations against Dr. Blackwell. At 77, his decades on the bench had exposed him to countless examples of human frailty and moral failure. But cases involving the mistreatment of veterans held special significance for a man whose own family had been touched by military service and whose faith demanded special care for society's most vulnerable members. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath as the proceedings began. Every seat was filled with veterans, healthcare professionals, legal observers, and media representatives, creating an audience that understood the historic nature of the moment. The presence of so many veterans in uniform created an atmosphere of solemnity and respect that elevated the proceedings beyond a typical legal hearing into something approaching a national reckoning with how America treats those who serve. Dr. Harrison Blackwell entered the courtroom, flanked by his expensive legal team, but his usual confidence had been replaced by the haggard appearance of a man whose world had collapsed around him. The months of investigation, media scrutiny, and professional isolation had taken their toll. His once perfect appearance showed signs of stress, and his movements lacked the authoritative presence that had characterized his interactions with patients and colleagues for decades. The prosecution's presentation of evidence was methodical and devastating. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh built her case piece by piece, starting with Marcus Thompson's military service record and medical history, then documenting in excruciating detail the substandard care he had received. From Dr. Blackwell, medical experts testified about the appropriate standard of care for someone with Marcus's condition, creating a stark contrast with the dismissive treatment he had actually received. The most powerful testimony came from Sarah Martinez, the emergency room nurse whose conscience had sparked the investigation. Her account of Dr. Blackwell's behavior was delivered with the precision of a medical professional and the passion of a fellow veteran who had witnessed an unconscionable betrayal of trust. Her description of Marcus's condition and Dr. Blackwell's indifferent response painted a picture of medical callousness that shocked even seasoned legal observers. Additional witnesses included other hospital staff members who had observed Dr. Blackwell's pattern of discriminatory treatment toward veterans and uninsured patients. Their testimony revealed a systematic approach to providing substandard care based on patients' perceived social worth rather than their medical needs. The picture that emerged was of a physician who had forgotten the fundamental principle that all patients deserved equal care regardless of their circumstances. The defense team's strategy became apparent as they attempted to portray Dr. Blackwell as a dedicated physician overwhelmed by the pressures of modern emergency medicine. They argued that his treatment of Marcus Thompson, while perhaps lacking in bedside manner, met the minimum standards for emergency care, and that the subsequent media attention had unfairly destroyed the reputation of a physician who had saved countless lives over his career. However, the defense's arguments were systematically dismantled by the prosecution's evidence of pattern behavior and the testimony of medical experts, who explained that competent emergency care required more than simply meeting minimum standards. The revelation of Dr. Blackwell's fraudulent billing practices further undermined any claim that his actions were motivated by medical judgment rather than personal convenience and financial gain. As the evidence phase of the hearing concluded, Judge Caprio called for a brief recess, during which the courtroom buzzed with subdued conversations about the testimony they had witnessed. Veterans compared their own experiences with VA and civilian healthcare, while medical professionals discussed the ethical implications of Dr. Blackwell's behavior. The weight of the moment was palpable, as everyone present understood that they were witnessing more than a legal proceeding. They were participating in a national conversation about values, honor, and the treatment of those who serve. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Judge Caprio's reputation for combining legal expertise with profound moral insight had created expectations that his response to Dr. Blackwell's case would be both legally sound and ethically powerful. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. As the judge prepared to address the evidence and testimony that had been presented, Marcus Thompson sat in the front row, surrounded by veterans who had become his advocates and supporters. His presence served as a constant reminder of what was at stake, not just legal consequences for Dr. Blackwell, but validation for a veteran who had been made to feel worthless by someone sworn to heal and help. The contrast between Marcus's quiet dignity and Dr. Blackwell's obvious anxiety created a powerful visual metaphor for the moral dimensions of the case. Dr. Blackwell's family members, who had attended the hearing to show support, struggled with the revelation of behavior that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the man they loved. His wife sat with tears streaming down her face, not tears of sympathy for her husband's legal troubles, but tears of shame and disappointment at learning about actions that violated the values she thought they shared. The medical community representatives present understood that Judge Caprio's decision would send a message about accountability and professional responsibility that would resonate throughout Rhode Island's healthcare system. Hospital administrators, medical school faculty, and practicing physicians all waited to see how the legal system would address a case that challenged fundamental assumptions about medical ethics and professional behavior. As Judge Caprio prepared to speak, the courtroom fell into the kind of profound silence that precedes moments of historical significance. Everyone present understood that they were about to witness not just the resolution of a legal case, but a statement about American values the treatment of veterans, and the responsibilities that come with professional privilege and public trust. Judge Caprio's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the accumulated wisdom of nearly 4 decades on the bench and the moral authority of a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of justice, tempered with mercy. His first words were directed not at the legal technicalities of the case, but at the fundamental human questions that lay at its heart. What do we owe to those who serve? How do we measure professional responsibility? And what does it mean to heal in a society that too often forgets its most vulnerable members? The judge began by acknowledging the presence of the veterans in his courtroom, his voice carrying a warmth and respect that immediately conveyed his understanding of their sacrifice and service. He spoke about his own family's military history, his father's service in World War II, and his lifelong belief that those who put their lives on the line for their country deserved not just gratitude, but tangible support and care when they returned home. Judge Caprio's examination of Marcus Thompson's service record was thorough and moving. He detailed the young man's enlistment at age 19, his multiple deployments to Afghanistan, his exemplary service record, and the circumstances of his injury in service to his country. The judge's voice carried a pride and respect that had been absent from Dr. Blackwell's clinical dismissal, treating Marcus not as a case study, but as a hero whose sacrifice demanded recognition and honor. The transformation in Marcus Thompson as Judge Caprio spoke was visible to everyone in the courtroom. The veteran who had entered feeling dismissed and devalued began to sit straighter, his eyes focusing on the judge's face with an expression of hope that had been absent for months. For the first time since his encounters with Dr. Blackwell, Marcus was being seen and acknowledged as the decorated veteran and valuable human being that he was. Judge Caprio then turned his attention to the medical profession and the sacred trust that patients place in their physicians. His words painted a picture of medicine as a calling rather than merely a career, emphasizing the oath that all doctors take to first do no harm, and the special responsibility that comes with the power to heal or to cause suffering through indifference. The judge's analysis of Dr. Blackwell's behavior was devastating in its precision and moral clarity. He methodically examined each aspect of the physician's treatment of Marcus, contrasting what had been done with what should have been done, what was legally permissible with what was ethically required. His words carried no personal animosity toward Dr. Blackwell, but rather a profound disappointment in someone who had abandoned the principles that should guide every healthcare provider. Judge Caprio's discussion of the broader implications of the case elevated the proceedings beyond individual accountability to societal responsibility. He spoke about the obligation of healthcare systems to serve all patients equally, the duty of medical professionals to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves, and the special debt that American society owes to its veterans. His words served as both a condemnation of Dr. Blackwell's actions and a call to action for systemic reform. The judge's examination of Dr. Blackwell's fraudulent billing practices was particularly withering. He connected the financial deception to the moral deception of providing substandard care while billing for comprehensive treatment, painting a picture of a physician who had betrayed both his patients and the healthcare system that had entrusted him with responsibility and authority. As Judge Caprio continued, his attention turned to the concept of reputation and how it is earned, maintained, and lost. He spoke about Dr. Blackwell's professional achievements and social standing, acknowledging the positive contributions he had made to the medical community, while making it clear that past accomplishments could not excuse present failures of character and professional responsibility. The judge's words about accountability were particularly powerful as he explained that privilege and position carry greater, not lesser, responsibility for ethical behavior. He spoke about the trust that patients place in physicians and how the violation of that trust represents not just a personal failing, but a betrayal of the entire medical profession's commitment to healing and service. Judge Caprio then did something that demonstrated his unique approach to justice. He addressed Dr. Blackwell directly, not with condemnation, but with an appeal to whatever remained of the idealism that had originally drawn him to medicine. The judge spoke about redemption and the possibility of learning from failure, but he made it clear that such redemption would require genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a commitment to fundamental change. The judge's sentencing reflected his careful balance of justice and mercy. Dr. Blackwell would face significant financial penalties, including restitution to Marcus Thompson and substantial fines related to his fraudulent billing practices. His medical license would be suspended for 2 years, during which he would be required to complete extensive retraining in medical ethics and cultural sensitivity, with particular emphasis on veteran healthcare needs. More significantly, Judge Caprio ordered Dr. Blackwell to perform 1,000 hours of community service specifically at veterans' healthcare facilities, where he would work under supervision to understand firsthand the challenges faced by the patients he had dismissed so callously. The judge made it clear that this service was not merely punishment, but an opportunity for education and potential redemption. The judge's attention then turned to Marcus Thompson, and the transformation in his tone was remarkable. Where he had spoken to Dr. Blackwell with disappointed authority, he addressed Marcus with the warmth and respect due a decorated veteran who had served his country with honor. Judge Caprio acknowledged not just Marcus's military service, but his courage in pursuing justice despite the personal cost and public scrutiny. Judge Caprio announced that the court would work with veterans advocacy organizations to ensure that Marcus received the comprehensive medical care he needed, including treatment at private facilities, if necessary, to address the damage caused by months of inadequate care. He also ordered that Dr. Blackwell's restitution payments would be sufficient to cover these medical expenses and provide some measure of financial security for Marcus as he continued his recovery. The judge's final words addressed the broader audience of veterans, healthcare professionals, and citizens who had gathered to witness the proceedings. He spoke about the obligation of all Americans to ensure that veterans receive the care and respect they deserve, not as charity, but as a debt of honor that can never be fully repaid. His words served as both validation for Marcus Thompson and a challenge to society to do better by all who serve. As Judge Caprio concluded his remarks and court was adjourned, the reaction in the courtroom was immediate and emotional. Veterans rose to their feet in a spontaneous ovation, not for the judge, but for the vindication of their brother in arms and the affirmation that their service had meaning and value. Many were moved to tears by the recognition and respect that Marcus had finally received. Dr. Blackwell sat in stunned silence, the full weight of his fall from grace finally sinking in. His legal team gathered around him to discuss appeals and next steps, but the damage to his reputation and career was clearly irreversible. The man who had entered the courtroom as a prominent physician left as someone whose name would forever be associated with the callous mistreatment of a veteran in need. Marcus Thompson, surrounded by his newfound community of supporters, struggled to process the validation and support he had received. For months, he had been made to feel worthless and forgotten, but Judge Caprio's words and the presence of so many veterans who had rallied to his cause provided a foundation of dignity and respect that would support his ongoing recovery. The Media coverage of the hearing would extend far beyond Rhode Island, as Judge Caprio's words about veteran care and professional responsibility resonated with audiences across the nation. The case would be studied in medical schools and ethics courses, serving as a powerful example of how individual failures can reflect broader systemic problems that require collective attention and action. Sarah Martinez, the nurse whose conscience had initiated the entire investigation, watched the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Her decision to report Dr. Blackwell's behavior had cost her professionally, as she had faced retaliation and eventual termination from Rhode Island Medical Center. But seeing Marcus Thompson finally receive justice and recognition made every sacrifice worthwhile. In the days and weeks that followed, the case would continue to reverberate throughout Rhode Island's medical and legal communities. Hospital administrators would implement new policies to prevent discriminatory treatment of veterans and other vulnerable patients. Medical schools would strengthen their ethics curricula, and veterans advocacy organizations would use the case as a rallying point for broader healthcare reform. Judge Caprio would later reflect that the case represented everything he believed about the law's potential to serve not just as a mechanism for punishment, but as a tool for education, redemption, and social progress. Through his careful balance of accountability and compassion, he had transformed a moment of moral failure into an opportunity for community healing and systemic improvement. The story of Marcus Thompson and Dr. Blackwell would become a defining moment in discussions about veteran care, medical ethics, and the responsibilities that come with professional privilege. But more than that, it would stand as a testament to the power of individual courage, from Sarah Martinez's decision to speak up, to Marcus Thompson's determination to seek justice, to Judge Caprio's commitment to ensuring that the law serves all members of society with equal dignity and respect. In a nation often divided by politics and ideology, the case provided a moment of moral clarity that transcended partisan boundaries. The simple principle that those who serve their country deserve respect and care in return resonated with Americans across the political spectrum, creating a rare moment of unity around shared values and common humanity. Thanks for watching. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell us in the comments below if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next case. Your support helps us share more powerful stories of justice and compassion.